So welcome to this event, which is the first official event of the Australian Centre for Glass Design at Melbourne Polytechnic in Paran. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Centre acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Welcome to everybody, and particularly for everybody who's local, but everybody who's participating from other states, territories and countries, including far north Queensland, New Zealand, Europe and the UK, where it is about 4 AM. So thank you for joining us. A bit of housekeeping before we start. Please ask your questions through the Q&A button which you have on your screen. If you just write your questions, you can do that anytime throughout the lecture, and Bronwyn will answer as many as time permits after her talk. And the other thing is, if we experience any technical details at our end, which we're not anticipating at all, but we just thought it was a good idea to have a plan B, if we go off air, what we'll do is just wait a few moments, and what we'll do is start a new Zoom meeting and we'll send you the link, but I'm sure we're not going to need that. So I would like to start by introducing the Australian Centre for Glass Design at Melbourne Polytechnic in Paran. Some background. In 2015, after many years of advocacy with Architectural Glass Design Australia, Bronwyn and I created Glaas Inc to specifically address certain issues around glass as art and to encourage the use of glass in art and architecture. Glass, spelt G-L-A-S, actually stands for Glass, Light, Art and Architecture Synergies. One of the initial critical issues was that in 2015, there were only 4 people under the age of 40 who were trained to properly conserve and restore stained glass in Australia. And there was no formal training available at all. Glaas Inc approached Melbourne Polytechnic in 2015, and we opened discussions which resulted in Melbourne Polytechnic applying for and achieving a Victorian state government grant in 2018 through the Workforce Training and Innovation Fund and the Department of Education and Training. This grant was groundbreaking in that it supported the development and delivery of both a Certificate 3 and Certificate 4 qualification in glass and glazing, the designed glazing stream, and the establishment of the Australian Centre for Glass Design at the Melbourne Polytechnic campus in Paran. The design glazing course encompasses lead light, stained glass, copper foil, fused and slumped glass, sandblasting, and comprehensive glass skills such as cutting and handling glass, installation, and compliance with Australian standards and other requirements, as well as design and creative elements. Glaas Inc participated in the training package review of the qualification, which allowed us to help shape the course, which encompasses both practical and design skills and knowledge, and which is supported and widely approved of by the glass industry sector and the glass artistic community. Industry involvement in the course is solid, with both artists and businesses providing talks, work opportunities, mentoring, and practical assistance to the students. Our appreciation to Melbourne Polytechnic for embracing glass courses, and to the Victorian State Government and particularly the Department of Education and Training, which has allowed a new generation of glass artists, practitioners and conservators to be trained and to retain the age-old skills, which these days are being blended with modern technology and designed to create the glass of tomorrow. Glaas Inc also focuses on promoting awareness of the vast potential for artistic and commercial opportunities for glass to be utilised more fully as a contemporary design and architectural element in the built environment. Opportunities which will be developed by many of our students as they embark on their glass careers. The next event for the centre is Lightworkers, which is an exhibition experience in glass plus light, opening in mid-November and including the work of some of Australia's finest studio and architectural glass designers and artists. And that will be both a real exhibition, which is wonderful, in the centre space on High Street, Prahran, on the Melbourne Polytechnic campus, as well as a virtual exhibition. So we'll let you know about that. So on to today's lecture, and we're so lucky to have Dr Bronwyn Hughes OAM, who writes and lectures on history, design and conservation of Australian stained glass, and is a consultant to heritage architects and organisations, church bodies and custodians of heritage buildings across Australia. As a glass artist in a past life, she maintains a close interest in the application of glass for contemporary architecture. Her current research projects include compiling and editing the first encyclopedia of Australia's stained glass makers and running the Glaas Inc research website for Glaas Inc. Her much anticipated book, Lights Everlasting, Australia's commemorative stained glass from the Boer War to Vietnam, is expected to go to press as soon as COVID restrictions permit and to be published in 2021. So we'll be looking out for that. Bronwyn was awarded an Order of Australia Medal in the 2019 Australia Day Honours for her services to the visual arts, especially to glass, and it was so well deserved. And I'll now hand over to Bronwyn to start the lecture.
Thank you, Donna. It's lovely to be with you all. It's very weird, though, I must say, not being able to see everybody, and I miss your smiling faces. I too wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am at the moment, which is the Mornington Peninsula, the home of the Burrawong people. It is wonderful that so many people from around the globe are able to join us, and I reiterate Donna's welcome, especially those who are sitting bleary-eyed over a very early breakfast. I am aware too of how many of you have such diverse interests, and therefore I decided that I'd better make this talk a bit of a blend. So it's part biography, part history, as well, of course, covering this amazingly interesting, rich period of stained glass in Australia. It is, in only a few days' time, it will be the anniversary of William Montgomery's birthday. He was born 170 years ago on the 2nd of November 1850. And it's therefore very fitting, I think, that we have this event today, and I very much hope I can do justice to his great legacy. I can only extend my thanks, first of all, to William himself for keeping such abundant documentary evidence throughout his lifetime, to his descendants who stored their husbands, fathers, and then their grandfathers' stuff in attics, cupboards, and garages for decades after his death. I particularly want to thank Chris and Helen Montgomery for entrusting this rich archive to me for years while I worked through it, and then with Michael Montgomery for gifting it to the State Library of Victoria, where it's been conserved and stored. It is of immense significance, this collection, and the only comprehensive record of the art and enterprise of an Australian stained glass artist that is in existence today. Now to the man himself. William Montgomery was the leading stained glass artist in Melbourne for 40 years. From shortly after he arrived in 1886, right up to his death in 1927, when he was still working. Those 40 years would be a time of great social change, from outpost of the British Empire to a Commonwealth of Australia, from prosperity, speculation and excess to deep economic depression, from peace to war, and then an uneasy peace again. Architecture too would change from grand Italianate Victorian through a range of federation styles to modest interwar austerity and the early moderne. But all this was in the future. Let us go back briefly to his pre-Australian training and experience, as this was a big part of the reason behind his success. William Montgomery was born in 1850, second child of Anne and John Montgomery. John was advertising at that time as a plasterer, in inverted commas really, because it indicates a highly trained craft that involved hand moulding cornices and ceiling roses. Later, he advertised as a sculptor. By then, he was working with his eldest son, Jack. William did reasonably well at school without being a star, and I seem to remember in the collection that there is a book prize for his consistent attendance. At 14 years of age, he was apprenticed as a glass stainer with one of the several stained glass firms in Newcastle at that time. And what a document that is. I don't expect you to read it. Best known of the glass stainers in Newcastle was William Wales, who employed about 80 men at the height of its success. But it was to the little-known Henry Mark Barnett, a former Wales apprentice, to whom the 14-year-old William became indentured for the next 7 years, starting at the princely wage of 2 shillings per week. Barnett was not of the old school, of the guild school that shunned the addition of a signature to his windows, and this was just one of the lessons that the young William imbibed during his lengthy apprenticeship. That's just dodgy photos are all by me. The good ones are absolutely noted when we get to them. But one of Henry Mark Barnett's windows, and there's another. And if you get very close to your screen, you will see that he has signed that window. See part of it anyway, just in the bottom there. Now that apprenticeship was not only long, but each week was long and included a half Saturday. Montgomery was also expected to attend art and design classes at night as well, which William Wales had instructed his apprentices to do as well. They were different times, different expectations, and I dare say different outcomes to the apprentices of today. However, it all paid off handsomely, as William not only completed his indenture satisfactorily, but he was awarded a national scholarship to attend the South Kensington Art School in London, one of only 3 awarded throughout Britain for the year 1871. For the next 3 years, he was a typical student. He worked hard, played hard, made lifelong friends among the other students, including people like George Clawson and Michael Coulson. And at the same time, he did complete the highly prescribed art training offered at that time. There was a lot of copying went on. They spent a lot of time in the cast gallery, copying these plaster casts of the classical and well-known remains in Rome and Florence and other places. But anatomy was on the course, as you can see from one of the drawings there, costume drawing as well. There was no life drawing, but he did manage to go to a particular school in Chelsea where he did life drawing as well in his free time. It's probably fun. He was employed at Clayton & Bell, London's leading stained glass firm, which supplied windows primarily to Anglican churches, and he stayed there for about 3 years. I think it was while he was working there that he was headhunted by Franz Meyer and Company of Munich, which had a branch office in London since 1865. They were looking for a suitably qualified glass stainer to teach, in their words, the English style of glass painting to their team of men. At that time, the Munich firms tended towards the Renaissance models that included perspective, or at least a depth of field in the background, and fuller gesturing figures to impart their narrative. This catalogue from the period, which was in Montgomery's collection, clearly shows his influence. For some reason, the laser's not working. So the second image from the left is, I believe, Montgomery's work, quite different to the others there, although they're all somewhat different. But this one included 13th century architectural ornament, which later appears in his earliest Australian work, and his figure is set against a flat background, reliant on symbols, in this case the Sacred Heart, with no other explanation required for a well-versed congregation. Now, I'll just show you a couple of the firm's windows, which were sent to Australia during this period that he was working for them. The English influence is very noticeable. The east window of St John's Anglican Church, Fremantle, on the left, and one of the windows, two of which went to the Blessed Sacrament Chapel at St Patrick's Cathedral, Melbourne, in which I think he had a hand. It's too small to show you really, but some of those figures definitely are very Montgomery-ish. Munich was the epicentre of European culture by the 1870s, late 1870s, and English and American artists flocked to the city as hoteliers. Montgomery joined the Anglo-American Art Club, which had been formed only the year before he arrived, and was invited to the prestigious Art Academy masked balls and events that abounded, especially during the summer season. Fancy dress was a big part of these occasions, none more so than the annual Waldfest, which involved a procession, nights camping in the forest, and of course, drinking beer. No women, despite what you might think looking at some of these figures. William is the chap in the light grey suit, battered grey top hat with a young lady with a lace head covering leaning over his shoulder. On his other side, the man in a black topper with a poster in front of him is Bernard Hall, who would later be appointed the director of Melbourne's National Gallery only a few years later. The two men became great friends and spent their holidays together, hiking in the Alps during the summer break. Although it seems that Bernard's fear of heights might have got the better of him and caused a problem at one point, and he had to be rescued by William, as he later recorded so succinctly in his sketchbook. And I love this view of his backside trying to climb up over the hill, and also William who's put his paint box down and hung his rucksack over a rock to help Bernard scale the heights. William later wrote that all was forgiven, as Hall had brought a fine bottle of whiskey, carefully wrapped in a blanket, which they shared with the small artist party. After Hall came to Melbourne in 1892, the two men lunched together each week in Bernard's studio above the gallery, discussing art, politics and the state of the world. And later, after 1916, William became one of the trustees of the National Gallery as well. Despite all the hard work and good fun in Munich, Montgomery was also contemplating his funeral and read glowing reports of Melbourne's prosperity and the good sport to be had, and began planning to emigrate. I remember finding a lovely little cutting about association football in Sydney in William's wallet when I was going through the documents at the Montgomery's place. His plans to emigrate were momentous, a momentous step for a young man. Around this time too, he met an American China painter, Harriet Postlethwaite, possibly at the American Art Club, and they were engaged to be married before Montgomery returned to Newcastle. Once back at home, Montgomery set about buying everything he felt was needed to set up as a stained glass artist on the other side of the world. Sheets of English and German antique glass, a range of glass paints and stains, fine brushes, rolls of cartoon paper, walnut stain with which he drew his cartoons, or brushed his cartoons really, a lead mill and a series of cheeks for milling different lead profiles. He inquired about a kiln for firing glass, but decided to buy in Melbourne instead. Presumably it was Harriet who bought the household goods, or at least a substantial trousseau with her, as no records survive amongst those documents. While back living in Newcastle, Montgomery was adding to his funds by creating designs and drawing up cartoons for the Gateshead Glass Company. I wish I could find more out about that period, but very few records remain. He also completed a series of life-size figures of saints, which he painted on sheets of zinc for a reredos at the Church of England at Bath Easton in southern England. His final and most important pre-Australian work was a commission for a 3-light window at Christchurch, Seaham, in memory of the Marquess of Londonderry. It was very well received by the Seaham Colliery Committee, who organised the commission, and the gentleman's widow, Lady Vane Stewart. One of these 3 cartoons survives, and you can see it there, and it's part of the Montgomery collection in the State Library of Victoria. William and Harriet arrived on the SS Bothwell Castle on Saturday the 18th of December 1886, after a 2-month voyage in every sort of weather, from calm to sunny to storms. On the day of the ship's arrival, it battled strong winds from Port Phillip Heads up to Hobson's Bay, coupled with a top temperature of 90 degrees, 32 degrees today. Harriet Montgomery must have been particularly keen to leave the ship, as she was the only woman amongst the 6 saloon passengers left on board by the time they reached Melbourne. It's assumed that the Montgomerys joined the Bothwell Castle in London, but maybe it was in Antwerp. After all, they were married in Brixen in the Austrian Tyrol only the previous month, and they honeymooned in Venice. So it's possible they travelled overland to reach Antwerp only a week later. Within months of their arrival, they were living in the Melbourne suburb of Hawthorn, just round the corner from Frederick McCubbin and his family, who would become close friends. And William had rented premises in Flinders Street on the corner of Hosier Lane. Wonder what he'd think of it now. And by February, he was engaged on 2 important commissions for the Catholic Church in New South Wales. St Michael's Catholic Church Wagga Wagga was already under construction under the capable and enthusiastic guidance of the redoubtable Reverend Father Patrick Dunn, who was using designs by Melbourne architects Tappan, Gilbert and Dennehy. Montgomery was commissioned for all the windows in the church, which now comprises the first stage of the cathedral. 1 nave window was dedicated to Father Dunn, Vicar General of the diocese. Windows in St Michael's were very well received, as noted in the press. The windows are Victorian in manufacture, and the workmanship reflects great credit on the artist, who has succeeded in producing the subjects in a highly satisfactory manner. The drawings are bold and appropriate, the figures and drapery chaste, the colouring wonderfully bright yet softly subdued in tone, whilst the monograms and border groupings are arranged in the best cathedral taste and artistic finish. And one gets the impression of what they were looking for and what Montgomery was able to deliver. And I think that's one of his finest portraits of Father Dunn. It was done from a photograph, which is also in the Montgomery archive. It was to be the first of many commissions that Montgomery fulfilled for Tappan designed churches, and almost immediately it led to a commission for another New South Wales church, St Augustine's in Yass. Here, Montgomery designed and made all 14 windows between 1887 and 1889. At Wagga and Yass, there is no suggestion of either the primary colours evident in the High Victorian, nor a dim religious light that would later become much more popular. Instead, his light palette, with his hallmark grey blues, detailed and sumptuous rendering of embroidery and ornament superimposed on his drawing and drafting skills, were evident from these very early Australian works. If there is a criticism of these early windows, it's his failure to recognise the strength of Australian light in Wagga when compared with the Northern Hemisphere with which he was so familiar. And the blue greys that I mentioned have actually been broken in that window of St Patrick, unfortunately, and the background is a replacement. Although an unknown artist just arrived in the Antipodes, it's possible that, as well as the letter of satisfaction that he received following the Marquess of Londonderry memorial, that these prestigious commissions were in some part thanks to Harriet Montgomery and her influential American family. She brought letters of introduction from the Bishop of Philadelphia to the newly elevated Cardinal Moran in Sydney, as well as one from a family friend, State Senator for Ohio, William W. Dodge. He sent his letter to the American consul in Melbourne. Back in his Melbourne studio, Montgomery was designing and making individual windows for suburban Anglican churches and for St Paul's Anglican in Sale, Gippsland. The stoning of Stephen in 1887 for St Stephen's Anglican Church in Richmond has certain similarities with that earlier window in Newcastle upon Tyne, giving some credibility to the likelihood of Montgomery's involvement with that commission whilst still an apprentice. His first year in the colony must have been a roller coaster of a ride as he juggled so many commissions, but he also had a busy life outside the studio. William and his friend Fred McCubbin were among the founding members of the Victorian Artists Society, which was formed from a few smaller groups to provide a strong and united art association in the lead up to the International Exhibition of 1888. Later, Montgomery would make a vital contribution as its president through the lean years 1912 to 1916, and he maintained his exhibiting membership until the early 1920s. In 1921, I think it was, he was awarded the OBE, the Order of the British Empire, for the work he did as president of the VAS during the war years, where they raised sufficient money to buy a motor ambulance for the troops in Europe. As if the church work was not enough in his first years in Melbourne, he was sought after by architects for the grand mansions that were springing up in Melbourne. Architects recognised his fresh new ideas, notably that lighter palette and his design ability, while clients wished to be seen as cultured and welcoming by installing grand and decorative stained glass. Melbourne architect John Beswick engaged Montgomery to make glass panels for his own home in Rother, Hawthorn. These were quite modest but successful, and he subsequently completed many entrances and stairwell windows for Beswick's buildings, including the adjoining homes of Cullymont and Airmont in Canterbury, where the entrances complained the erudition of the occupants, with images of Sir Walter Scott in one entrance and Shakespeare in the other. And I do love that King Lear going nuts on the left-hand side there. Each one was accompanied by an array of their best-known characters. At Kumbukwapa in Brisbane, designed by G.A. Addison for Sir T. Stevens, there are 4 superb figures of Shakespeare's heroines, also attributed to Montgomery. And while the quality suggests that they are certainly by him, and I would certainly like to think so, I've yet to unearth any supporting documentary evidence. So if anyone's got any out there, please let me know. Shakespeare was once again the subject for a grand vestibule at Norwood in Brighton in Melbourne, designed by Philip Treby for Mark Moss JP. The building was a prime example of the excesses of the period and a mixture of architectural styles. Montgomery's glass gave the interior a remarkable presence, most notably in the 35 panels with figures from Shakespeare's histories, comedies and tragedies, which dominated the vestibule, and the ballroom series, dancing, bowling, hunting, fishing and archery, and almost every other room of the house had some stained glass somewhere. As it went from the front to the back, though, naturally enough, it got less and less decorative, much more lead light at the back. But by the time Norwood was completed, there were significant signs that Melbourne's years of prosperity were about to come crashing to an end. And within the next 2 years, opportunities for such magnificent commissions dwindled to almost zero. The money lending, speculation and excessive financial borrowing of the previous decade brought many businesses to bankruptcy. Montgomery was one who weathered the period, producing several fine staircase landing windows in the 1890s, sometimes smaller than previous works of the 1880s. And one is this window, The Lay of the Minstrel, 1896, for the Beswick-designed Red Home in St Kilda Road, in which aesthetic motifs of pomegranates and daffodils were integrated into the design. And at Hawthorne, Tay Cregan, the hunting scene at halfway up the stair, which you can just see the lower section of the Art Nouveau panel above it. Although it was not as large as some of the earlier panels, Montgomery's hunting scene is a stunning symphony of colour, and I just had to put this in. If the students used that much red in one window, I'd probably be doubting it, but it's just the most wonderful, sumptuous window. Architects John Beswick and Guillaume Purchas were advancing towards Federation styles of architecture. A more conservative approach was adopted for the numerous windows and French door panels for Sir William Clark's new townhouse, Cliveden in East Melbourne. Sir William had imported the main staircase window from James Powell and Sons, Whitefriars in London, which is now wonderfully displayed at the 19th century galleries in the National Galleries of Victoria's collection. But Montgomery secured the commission for all the decorative glass throughout the reception areas of the mansion. And most of these, I think, are also at the National Gallery, and they are made up of some painted panels and German rounds, these lovely things that look like the bottoms of wine glasses all joined together with lead. They're beautiful windows. Montgomery's personal life had its ups and downs too in the 1890s. Harriet and Annie McCubbin were close, drawn together by a shared Catholicism and both married to Anglicans, and even more so when their first sons, Louis McCubbin and young William Montgomery, generally known as Mont, were born in the same year, 1890. When the economic depression saw a downturn in stained glass commissions, Montgomery did not give up his Flinders Street studio at all, but instead the Montgomerys rented their house in Hawthorne and moved out to the rural district of Heidelberg, maintaining a regular close contact, though, with the McCubbins. In 1894, Mont's infant brother Hugh was born, but died only 4 months old. The McCubbins touchingly named their new baby Hugh Montgomery McCubbin, no doubt in tribute to this friendship. A further tribute this time from his parents, was installed in St John's Catholic Church, Heidelberg. And this is the detail of the inscription. And I must say, I did a bit of a dance around the sanctuary when I saw this window, realised it was Montgomery's, and then saw the name Montgomery on the window for a son I didn't know at that point existed. It was quite a light bulb moment in amongst the research. But further tragedy also was ahead of them. And when Harriet died in childbirth in 1900, Montgomery made another window for the church, the Sacred Heart, appearing to Harriet's favourite saint, St Margaret Mary Alacoque. But despite these trying times, and just as Montgomery had made the best of opportunities that came his way over the previous buoyant period, he now found new ways to maintain his flagging business. Unlike some firms that were forced to close their doors, he opened branches in Perth and Adelaide, who were less hard hit by the economic downturns, and maintained his connections with architects in other states, most notably Alexander North in Tasmania. These examples from the first years of the 1890s may seem far removed from the grand, fully painted works of the period, but they were not less successful in the way they complemented interior spaces with simplified Christian symbolism in lightly toned glasses, and also the external facades, where the texture of the lead light blended with the texture of timber or North's superb brickwork. The herringbone patterns of lead light were not only symbolic and decorative, but also had greater structural strength than traditional diamond quarries. The decision to use these designs was not always dictated by limited budgets, and at the William Tappan designed Loreto Convent Chapel in Ballarat, Montgomery filled the nave with pastel-toned series of lead lights that gave a soft interior ambience to the space, saving his painted work for the 3 rose windows, which are all quite different and quite stunning. This is just one example of commissions that he secured during these lean times in country Victoria. Other major windows were installed in Anglican churches at Clunes, Castlemaine, Bendigo, Kyneton, Murchison, and the Thompson Memorial Presbyterian Church at Terang. Although the economic outlook was improving as the Commonwealth of Australia came into being in 1901, prospects for stained glass remained distinctly uncertain. The grand entrances and staircase windows were gone forever as Federation architecture embraced lead-light casement windows, sometimes with residual coloured lead-light panels in Art Nouveau above them. They became Montgomery's bread and butter, which were interspersed with church commissions sent in his direction by clients, former clients and architects. There were some compensations for these lean years, however, in Montgomery's personal life. In 1907, he moved out of the boarding houses that he'd lived in with Mont since 1900 and married May Fraser Blacklog Rod, an art student at the National Gallery School who'd been seconded by McCubbin to act as governess to his children over the previous summer holidays at Macedon, where of course they met. Mrs. McCubbin, who'd stood in as a surrogate mum to young Mont, was none too pleased with this turn of events, although it's not clear whether she felt usurped or offended that the younger woman was an Anglican. She was given being May, was given the stamp of approval by the McCubbin boys and, more importantly, by Mont, who thought her great fun. In due course, he became brother to Anne and then to Richard, and William was proud father to them all. It was the plunging of the world into the war to end all wars in 1914 that, tragically, would bring stained glass to life again. Montgomery's son Mont, senior National Gallery art school student by 1914, elected to wait until after the end of the academic year before enlisting. He would spend the next 4 years in the service of God, King and Empire, all with the intention of coming home to assist his father, now well into his 60s. After Mont enlisted in 1915, shortly after Montgomery was commissioned for the first of more than 80 commemorative windows erected by families, congregations and communities in memory of soldiers who died far from home on the battlefields of Turkey, Palestine, and most of all in France and Belgium. For some grieving families, the installation of a stained glass window stood in place of a grave that they were unable to visit, and this memorial would become a place of pilgrimage and prayer. Among these many windows, I've selected just a few, all from Geelong Grammar School's Chapel of All Saints at Corio in Victoria. The building, designed by Alexander North, was under construction when war broke out, and it's not so surprising that all the windows in the sanctuary, nave and vestries would end up being memorials to former students, many of whom who had dashed off to enlist in their fathers' and grandfathers' regiments in Britain, while others died serving in Australian units. The headmaster, Dr Francis Brown, determined that the chapel's saints would reflect the British Church, as well as the 4 evangelists, St George and St Alban would be among them, as would the warrior saint St Michael and the messenger saint, St Gabriel. St Michael and St George was installed at the behest of one distraught father, who was so pleased with the result that he chose St Michael to be reworked as a rose window for the family's parish church, Holy Trinity Kew. Although these windows are among some of Montgomery's best and more decorative works, it was not an easy time for him. His own son was killed on the 6th of October 1918, 1 month short of the armistice, and on the last day the Australians would see action on the Western Front. There is, as far as I'm aware, no memorial window to this much beloved son. Times were changing, and the marked preference for St George, St Michael and the other saints was under review. The introduction of the Australian soldier into stained glass began early in 1920 and would be accepted into religious settings, complete with slouch hats, rifles and the Australian Commonwealth Military Forces badge. There's a rifle in that window along with the slouch hat. I like to think that this window and others like it that show a young soldier with auburn hair like Mont's are Montgomery's memorial to his son. The war took its toll of William Montgomery, and by 1924 he was suffering ill health, possibly the early signs of the heart condition that would carry him away. Without Mont, he sought assistance from some very important artists, Napier and Christian Waller, artists whom he may have met when they attended the gallery school at the same time as his son. But it was Napier Waller's War Sketches exhibition in 1918 that had particularly impressed Montgomery, who believed there was a monumentality within his work that could translate into stained glass. Bernard Hall was similarly impressed with Waller's design for the War Memorial mural competition for the gallery staircase, which was won by Septimus Power. But later, Napier's Peace mural was also added alongside Power's, and both remain extant at the State Library of Victoria. Napier began drawing up full-size cartoons from Montgomery's thumbnail sketches, some of which survive as part of the Montgomery collection at the State Library. He was later joined by his wife Christian, who also produced some fine cartoons, including the central light of the 3-light window for St Mary's Anglican Church at Bridgewater in Tasmania. When I saw this building some years ago, it was a derelict shell, and only some small fragments of the vandalised window are what remain, and they're in the collection, a private collection in Tasmania. Montgomery was the catalyst that encouraged Napier and Christian into a medium they had not previously experienced. And when Montgomery died in July 1927, it was Napier who took over the completion of cartoons for the Great South Window at Wilson Hall at the University of Melbourne, which was sadly destroyed by fire in 1952. May Montgomery introduced both the Wallers to the architect Louis Williams, the successor to Alexander North, who swiftly recognised and encouraged their talents. They would go on to complete windows for his and other architects' churches after a period of further study in Britain and Ireland. I think some of their finest windows were those that they designed in the 1930s, in which the influence of the arts and crafts as espoused by Christopher and Veronica Wall and the Irish Tower of Glass studio overlaid their broad knowledge of art and their introduction to glass in the Montgomery studio. And I had to include just a few of Christian's work as well. This is very close to Melbourne Polytechnic campus, and we hope to be able very soon to take the students over there to look at these beautiful windows for real, instead of just showing them some of Christian's fine work on slides. And this lovely little window that was a wedding present by Christian, 1930. Montgomery lived a full life, both personally and professionally, and his legacy should not be underestimated. He may have arrived in this country a little too late to contribute to the major cathedrals, but his windows can be found in every major city church in every state and an astounding number of country towns and settlements. He brought fresh new ideas in stained glass to a colony steeped in a conservative high Victorian style and left it 40 years later in the capable hands of a new generation, eager to embrace the modern and the modern age. Thanks so much, everybody, for listening.
Hello, thank you, Bronwyn. That was wonderful. It was an absolute feast of information and beautiful stained glass. Thank you so much. I'll just check with the questions. I think that Melinda Mockridge, hi, Melinda, has asked a question that I was going to ask you, so thank you. Bronwyn, you mentioned Norwood's windows, Norwood, and I know that building was demolished in the 50s. And what happened to the beautiful glass?
Great question, Melinda. It was dispersed. It did not sell at the auction that they held on site. And Grace Johnson, who was the owner-occupier at the time, offered it to Melbourne Grammar School, certainly the Shakespeare window. The other windows, I think, possibly were sold at that time, but the Shakespeare window went to Melbourne Grammar. It was stored and kept there with the idea of it being installed into a future building. That, of course, didn't happen. And Dr Robin Sharwood, who was the warden at Trinity College in Parkville, was offered whatever was left of he was offered the windows, but when they got them there were only 8, I think, windows of the 35 left. Now, when I came to it, I had to find where these were, didn't I? So I did quite a lot of sleuthing around, and we found one window in Kevin Little's studio in Sydney, and he said, "Oh, I actually installed a whole lot of those into some house in Bondi." Now, if anyone here is in Bondi, for heaven's sake, go looking. We haven't found them, but he remodelled them for a house in Bondi.
Mm.
And I recently wrote a little article for the Royal Historical Society, which some people here may have read. And in it, I mentioned the Norwood windows, Shakespeare windows, and lo and behold, somebody had one. And he had been a naughty little schoolboy in the 1960s, and he'd nicked one, which he is now very generously offering to give to Trinity College. The other windows are in private homes, as far as I am aware. I know I did find 2 of those lovely ballroom windows, bowling and dancing, in an East Malvern home. And I think there are some around the Brighton area still. But it's a conservation nightmare when these things get split up like that. And it's also an historical nightmare, because trying to find them again is very, very difficult. And the closure of churches at the moment is such that windows are being lost almost weekly.
Yeah, such a shame, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And, no, well, we can't keep everything. We really can't keep everything, but we should keep the best of it. And we don't even know what is the best of it.
So much still hidden away. I was just thinking that you should actually have Glass Detective on your CV as well. Apologies for my phone ringing in the background. That phone never rings. All right, another question. Thank you for that. Jeff Wallace, hi Jeff, has asked, do you know how long the Wallers actually worked for Montgomery?
Well, yes and no. They didn't sit physically in the studio. He would say to them, I need a window done I need a cartoon for the new east window at Nyngan, for instance, which I nearly put in but decided my photography was just too awful, and didn't. And he would give them the thumbnail, or one of them, the thumbnail, and they would take it to their studio and do it, and then it would be collected or they'd bring it back in. It was mainly 1926 and 27 intermittently. There are numbers of accounts. I know that it cost 10 guineas for that window, that cartoon for that window at Nyngan, for instance, which is a lot of money at that time. So they charged appropriately for artists what it would have taken them for time, which didn't often happen. I remember Juliet Peers actually interviewed Anne Montgomery, which was something I didn't manage to do before she died. And Anne said some weeks the men in the lead light studio took home more money than Dad brought home. So it was hard juggling all of that. And given the fact that they had to bring all those supplies from overseas, we've never made coloured glass by the sheet in this country. So everything had to be brought in, everything had to be imported. I think that answers the question, Jeff. I hope.
Okay, we've got another one from Ray Brown. Hi, Ray. All right, any chance once COVID is over that you could talk the State Library, Vic, into putting on an exhibition of Mont's sketches and other artefacts?
Oh, if only I could. Now, Ray, I've got a job for you. You can convince them, because I'm too close to it and they just say, oh, that's her, banging her own drum again. But that's the sort of thing we need, is a few advocates other than me getting out there and saying how wonderful this would be. It's something Madeline Say, who was head of pictures, and I had discussed as a possibility, because it is such a rich collection. It's so wonderful.
Mm.
And even just before COVID, probably in February, somebody found another 2 boxes of the most fantastic full-sized cartoons. I don't know, 3 metre, 4 metre long cartoons. Anne Montgomery's travelling exhibition, what was it? The travelling scholarship entry when she was at the art school herself years later. All sorts of wonderful things are there apart from Montgomery himself. So yes, go for it, Ray.
Well, perhaps we could coordinate something through Glaas Inc.
Awesome.
If everybody's listening who'd like to see that happen, sends Glaas Inc an email requesting that, and then we could put it, you know, collate it all and put it all together to the State Library. I think it'd be fabulous. Let's do it. We've got time.
Yeah, plenty of spare time, haven't we, Donna?
Hello, we've got Beverly Sherry. Hello, Bev. Asking, of his huge collection, is there any idea of what he himself was proud of?
Yeah, I think that's hard to say. I guess what he kept might be an indicator. Not really, not directly, no. I'm sure he really appreciated the opportunity that Geelong Grammar gave him because, as I said, maybe obliquely, but I said that stained glass needs money behind it to be really good, to have the best quality glass and the best glass painting for the numbers of firings and all the other things, so that it really is quite a wonderful thing for an artist when, you know, open book here, you can do what you like. And I think he took that opportunity, and I think he would be very proud of those. But no, as to what he himself really thought, it's very hard to say.
Just check if there's any more questions. Okay,
Vlad has sent a little message here. Thank you, Vlad. So glad you could join us because your wonderful photos make all the difference. Will we have a special on Napier Wallah too? Well, that would be a wonderful thing to have, and very, very happy.
might be timely to make our announcement on that point, Bronwyn.
Yes.
Yeah? Am I still doing that, or do I...
No, that's yours.
Well, we do have to make an announcement, which is quite exciting for us, and that is that we're at Glaas Inc. We're very keen to promote our great legacy in the field of Australian architectural glass. We have so much beautiful stained glass in this country. And so accordingly, we'd like to announce today that we plan to make this informal lecture actually an annual event. Henceforth to be named the William Montgomery Annual Lecture on Architectural Glass. So we're pretty excited about that, and I think that it may be really good to have next year's lecture on Napier Wallah, so that could well happen.
Not by me, but somebody else.
Maybe. Sorry, there's some more questions. I'll just quickly... hello, Lyndall. Lyndall Wisher says, were complete windows ever imported to Australia in the 1800s and 1900s for installation into new Australian buildings?
Yes, they were, both new buildings and old buildings, but for a long time the local product was not considered to be nearly as good as that which could be imported. And you see this over and over and over again in the press, that they say, we're amazed at this wonderful window by Montgomery or somebody else even. It's been made in Melbourne. It's been made in Sydney. Who'd have thought? And it's quite a cringe that goes on for a long time. In fact, places like Adelaide continued to import much longer than other places that developed a local business collection and artists. So Sydney and Melbourne, because they had their own local men, no women, they tended gradually to prefer the local product, especially given the time it took, and wars intervened when ships were sunk, and glass and paint and windows went with it. That sort of thing did change that thinking quite a lot. And in this, I don't know whether Fiona from New Zealand has managed to get in, but Fiona says the same thing about New Zealand. It too continued to import for a lot longer, remained more colonial for a lot longer. But there are some wonderful imported windows too, make no mistake.
And Christopher Parkinson. Hello, Christopher, all that way away.
Hello, Christopher.
It must be about, what, 5 a.m. now? It's getting better. Asks, did Mont travel abroad at all to look at new styles of glass, for example, arts and crafts aesthetic?
No. Once he came to Australia, he stayed put. He had a couple of opportunities where he might have gone back to Europe and England, but never took them. His family were always saying, why don't you come and see us? But no, he never did. But he kept up with everything very carefully. He subscribed to many journals, particularly the English journals, but also some of the German ones that he liked, and they're in the collection at the State Library. So that he knew what was going on all the time. He was stuck to some extent with a conservative clientele. The number of people who, even in the 1980s, and I tell this story often, that would say, oh, could we please have the light of the world in our church? And for heaven's sake, the light of the world was painted in 1854 or some time around there, and yet people still wanted it without any change from the Holman Hunt painting. They wanted it to be just like that. So he introduced things where he could, kept up with everything, but was limited to some extent. And I think in his later years, especially after Mont died during the war, I think he found it very hard after that.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And we've got a couple more. So thanks everyone for these questions.
Getting more.
Yeah, Patrick, hi Patrick. Gavigan has made a comment about the International Year of Glass, which is, can just mention quickly, some exhibitions may be projects for the International Year of Glass 2022. So, and just before you answer that, Bronwyn, someone else has asked, will the recording of this talk be made available on your website or elsewhere? And the answer is yes. And we'll talk about that at the end. So perhaps if you just want to give everybody a brief idea of the International Year of Glass.
Thanks for that, Patrick. The International Year of Glass is something that the obviously international glass community is very keen to promote, and very soon, within weeks, there will be a decision made at the UN about whether 2022 is the International Year of Glass. We hope so, because there's been such a big push towards it. In Australia, it's very much led by Patrick and through the Glass board, and we would be looking for different projects to make as features throughout that year, and they can be anything: scientific, industrial, manufacturing, and of course from our point of view, the historical, conservation, some of the other wonderful possibilities for exhibitions in museums and galleries are also there. So I think that, you know, there's plenty that we could talk about, and if anyone's got any thoughts about it, please get in touch, because, you know, one thing we've talked about is something with the National Library in Canberra, isn't it, Grace? And we need to talk about it a bit more. because I think it would just raise the profile of it, make people aware of how many churches are just going out of commission. You can't have every church being turned into somebody's lovely home or a bed and breakfast or heavenly pancakes. That was one I saw. Angels Cafe. So somehow we need to think about the future of some of this glass, which really is in great danger.
And thank you. I did just get a little distracted there because we're already getting emails from people supporting the idea of the exhibition at the State Library. So thank you all for doing that. That's wonderful. Really keen.
If I thought we would have this much reaction when I can't see or hear anybody.
I know.
It's wonderful. Thank you all so much.
And from Hello Jill Sten asks, we think there is a beautifully executed Montgomery Light of the World in Townsville Anglican Cathedral. Is that correct? And that's Jerry and Jilly from Sten. Thank you.
Definitely there is. And I remember you sending me a photo when you were up some scaffolding, which is where you seem to spend most of your lives, in that cathedral. And it's the only one I know of in a major cathedral, except for St Michael's, which, oh no, beg your pardon, St Patrick's Cathedral in Melbourne has two little tiny Montgomerys down in a little back sacristy or somewhere. The only ones that aren't by Hardman from England. So thanks, Jilly. That's marvellous for you to remember that. Yes, Light of the World. He wasn't so keen on it either, but he did it when people demanded it. And that's actually quite a good one from memory. It's a lovely Light of the World. As time went on, the Light of the World, the light was supposed to come from the wrong side, so that it was from the lantern below. Normally we're used to having light coming as it is on me from the sun up high. And it gave it that mystery by having the light coming from below the figure instead of the other way around. But as time went on, it all got a bit much for artists to deal with, and so they didn't deal with that light aspect at all. They just put a lantern in a guy with a nightie on and called it the Light of the World. Sorry, I'm getting rude.
Okay. Another question from Ray Brown, and also I just saw on the comments that Wayne at Toucan, hello Wayne, has left a comment, but I'll just copy that down while you answer this.
I've got that.
Oh, good. So you might want to address that perhaps after Ray's question, but Ray asks, is there much information about other members who were part of Mont's stained glass studio team, such as other glass painters? Was there anyone of particular note?
Yes, there were. Luckily, one of the things that's in the National Gallery of Australia is the last staff wages book. And so we can see from that who earned what and when. Now, the most well-paid member of staff from 1911 onwards, I think it was, not that that's when that book starts, but that's when he came to Australia, was David Gibson. David Gibson ended up, after Montgomery's death, staying on for the next 6 months until May Montgomery sold the business to Brooks Robinson. But he started then a business called Matheson Gibson in Melbourne, and a lot of their windows are around, and they're signed because he took up that challenge as well, I think, and signed his windows. So David Gibson was one. He was trained at, what's the name of that Lancashire firm? Shrigley and Hunt, and came out here as a young man already married, and his wife followed him a bit later. Another one earlier than him, actually it was the one he replaced, was a chap called Brownlow or Brownlow? Brownlow. And Brownlow trained in Newcastle as well. There's a huge connection between Newcastle on Tyne and Melbourne, and it's something I'd like to write up at some stage, because it starts with Montgomery and it goes and it goes and it goes, and all sorts of people come out here with connections to that place. Back to where I was. Mr. Brownlow was a very, very good glass painter, and some of his work Gavin Merrington has restored down in Holy Trinity, Hobart. I nearly put that in, that one of those little windows in. I think there's St. Peter and St. John, small windows. But Mr. Brownlow had a little bit of a problem. He'd go on a bender every now and then, which would last for weeks, and he wouldn't show up at work, and the work would get behind, and he wasn't sending any money home to his wife and children, who were destitute apparently. And eventually the the minister from the local church wrote to Montgomery to say, what on earth is going on? Montgomery took him back time and time again, and there are some really rather pathetic letters from the man saying, I'll be good, I won't do it again, I'll stay and I'll be... But it happened, and eventually he went, I think, back to England, and I don't know what happened to him. But that was a terrible shame, because he was absolutely superb, the way he painted. And if you look at Montgomery's work at different times, it changes. You can tell when Montgomery's doing it at the beginning, and you can tell when he comes back into it again at different times. But those were the two main men. Now, when he first came out here, he came with a lead lighter and a painter, followed soon after, or joined soon after. The lead lighter was William Robson, and he ended up starting Robson's in Ballarat, which still goes today, and it's still run by the Robson family as far as I'm aware. And I had a long discussion with the last Bill Robson a few years ago, who was very, very helpful about his grandfather. Then the other person that came with him was August Fisher, who went out on his own fairly shortly after they arrived. He didn't stay with Montgomery long, but he was a very good glass painter as well. Died in 1916, unfortunately, so we don't have a huge amount of his work.
Bronwyn, would you like to just have a look at Wayne's comment and just perhaps comment on that, please?
Yeah, that was great of Wayne to remember that. I do remember writing to Dr. Farrell, who ended up with some of the windows from Norwood, but I did not receive a response, and you maybe explain that, I think, Wayne, in your chat there, saying that they split up while you knew them in the early 90s. So that may explain why I didn't hear about them. But I'm sure David Turner gave me their address, so maybe I need to chuff around there and see. And I see that Dan has also put in a little comment about that too. Can you see that at the moment? At the moment, I can't see it. Here it is. Hi, Wayne. Last time I saw several of the Shakespeare windows, Dr. Farrell had them in their possession. Okay, that's it, yeah.
Great. I think maybe...
We'll find them all in the end. We really will. We'll find them all.
You're doing well so far. And in fact, thank you. Helen's here, Helen Walsh. Thank you, Helen. She's saying that your mind-boggling talk has me wondering how many years' work did it take that we can be thankful for? Quite a few. Just a couple, isn't it, Bronwyn?
Well, yes. Just the Montgomery... I don't know. I have to make another little thank you here too, because it was Donna who was making a window for Chris Montgomery's son's house, who put me in touch with Chris Montgomery in the first place. So that This was the reason Donna said, there's this man and he's got his grandfather's stuff.
And I wonder why you were so excited you did another little jig on the spot.
Yes, I'm good at little jigs on the spot.
I didn't quite understand at that point. It's a long time ago.
No, you do. So that was that must have been about 2000, the year 2000, somewhere around there. But I suppose all up, I've been working on this since the late 70s. But Montgomery since then, yeah. Thanks, Helen.
And that's all the questions. Thanks, everybody.
That's wonderful.
Thanks. Wonderful questions. And I think, Bronwyn, we're probably ready to tie it up, even though thank you for everyone. The majority of you stayed with us to this point, so thank you, given that everybody's busy. And thank you, Bronwyn, as usual. It was wonderful. And just an absolute feast of information, and especially a feast for the eyes. So we hope everybody enjoyed the experience of trawling through those 40 plus years of stained glass history, and that you've all learned a little more about this ancient art and craft over some interesting times through the 19th and 20th centuries. Just to finish, we definitely will have more events coming up, and we'd like to keep you informed of that. You can look at our website, which is glasinc.com.au. But we also have a newsletter which comes out, we try it monthly, but it's usually every 6 to 8 weeks, and we can let you know what's happening. So I am planning to send everybody who attended today an email to see if you'd like to be on our newsletter list if you're not already, and that's a really good way of keeping up to date with what's happening. And we do have really interesting events such as this, and also about contemporary glass as well, and talks by current makers and exhibitions and all sorts of interesting things. So thank you to everyone for your participation today. Thank you particularly, Bronwyn, and we look forward to seeing you all again, virtually or in person, hopefully in person soon. I'll just quickly check the comments in case there's anything I should say. Thank you for all your thank yous.
Yes, that's lovely.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. And Bronwyn, I think you're going to have to hit the button.
Oh, am I? End. I'm still the host.
So goodbye to everybody, and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.